Hi, Ashley. My name's Alix Madigan, and I'm very excited to be talking to you about your beautiful film, Wild Beauty, which I happened to see. And I'm so excited that we're going to have a dialogue about it. And I'm looking forward to finding out more about your process of the film and how it came about and what your hopes for it are, because obviously it's a film that's based in advocacy and has a tremendous message of a hope for change too. I'm excited to discuss it in greater detail. So to start with, just as a general question, but please tell me about the journey of the making of the film. Like, I think it's really interesting that you were incredibly occupied with making your other beautiful film, which is a narrative called Black Beauty, the feature film based on the very beloved and classic book. And that creation took you in a very roundabout way to this one, or maybe it wasn't a roundabout way. But can you tell us a little bit about the history of this project and how it came about for you?
The film was completely unexpected in its creation. And having grown up with horses during my childhood, I loved great equine themed novels like Walter Farley's The Black Stallion and Anna Sewell's Black Beauty. So getting to direct Black Beauty and write Black Beauty was really very full circle to my love of horses. So in the creation of Black Beauty and wanting to honor why Anna Sewell wrote that book, which most people don't know, she wrote that novel as an animal welfare plea for the horses of her time, the cab horses and the carriage horses in the late 1800s, in a time where most of humanity didn't really look at animals or horses in the same light that we do now as highly intelligent, thinking, feeling beings. And so in her publication of Black Beauty, she really helped revolutionize our understanding of animal intelligence and animal empathy. And so in researching that and discovering that in my process for Black Beauty, in trying to search for an authentic modern day parallel, I came across the plight of wild horses in our country and how they were being rounded up and are being rounded up by helicopters, stripped of their freedom and their families. And the more that I started going down the rabbit hole to understanding why, it seemed so absurd and profound and unjust and cruel. And so in the process of Black Beauty, again, wanting to reinforce authenticity, my husband and producing partner, Ed, and I raised a little bit of money to go out in 2018 and to film real wild horses in Utah, Wyoming, and Nevada. And we filmed the resplendence of those families and got to see these incredible interactions and these families, and from stallions rearing up to these delicate moments where these horses are standing over their little day-old foals, which are baby horses. And then we also filmed a roundup, and it was our first one that we had seen in person. And my heart broke in a way that I've never experienced in my chest, watching what was happening to those horses and being stampeded for hours, forced to run multiple Kentucky Derbies in the extreme heat. It was over 100 degrees. And numerous horses that we filmed were killed in that roundup, breaking their legs and necks. Several foals were trampled. And it was so unbelievable to me that as a horse person in my youth, that I wasn't aware that this was going on. And so the more I started talking to people about it with Black Beauty, I realized how few people knew. And so we decided to keep going. And our hope was that if Black Beauty is successful, and thankfully Disney Plus acquired it, and I suddenly got thousands of messages from kids around the world who were falling in love with wild horses, we figured we could keep going and perhaps create a Blackfish or the Cove for wild horses.
That's wonderful. Yeah. And those are incredible films as well. And obviously were impactful, I think, too, when they were released as well. So, I thought your film so beautifully captured the absolute dire necessity of preservation and conservancy. And one line I was so struck by was, we need the tonic of wilderness, which I thought was such a beautiful line. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I love that Henry David Thoreau quote. And it very much, I had come across it before we started filming. And that's it's just really what we felt when we were out there with the horses. This film was truly independent. We cobbled together the money as we went along. And so we filmed when we were able to, but there were several long stretches where we were out on the road for weeks and didn't go into a city for weeks at a time. I mean, and then to be out there in the wild and to hike out for miles at sunset. And sometimes we didn't find the horses, but other days that we did, it was the certain kind of magic that I hope everybody gets to experience once in their life, to be out there and to experience that tonic of wildness. And there were days where hundreds of horses surrounded us and the sky was, it was just gold, and everybody should experience that. And that's part of the wonder of our world. And that's what we're fighting for in the film.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ashley. That's so beautifully said. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your multiple roles on this. You produced it, you edited it, and you narrated it. And one of the things that I loved about your narration is that you never held back from the emotionality of what you were talking about. Like, I could very much hear in your voice when something had deeply affected you. But I'd love to talk about how you were able to tackle all that. I mean, obviously you directed it too. So to how you were able to tackle all those, is that your process? So would love to hear more about that.
It's interesting. I've been editing my own work for over 15 years, and that was born out of just being a scrappy independent filmmaker and just coming up doing, little commercials and then eventually indie features and leading to all of this. But I love to edit, but the film changed over time. Initially, we had numerous outlines, and I knew the information. We knew the information we wanted to distill to people, the facts as well as the emotionality of getting people to care about the individual horses. And having never done a documentary before, I really wanted to bring a narrative sensibility to the film, because if you care about the hero in a story or their best friend, you care about their larger journey. And so that's what we wanted to do with Wild Beauty. We were hoping to identify individual horses and families where people would hook on to them and to care. And what was really astounding is that they found us, and that the main herd that we followed and filmed for several years was the Aniki herd in Utah, which is one of the most iconic herds in the country. And so that made it even more heartbreaking when they were rounded up. But initially we thought we were going to create an indie Planet Earth with a celebrity narrator taking you through the journey. But as we kept filming and as we got bolder, the film became more journalistic as we went along. And I have a background in journalism. I worked as a journalist in New York before I came out to Los Angeles. And I never thought that would influence what I'm doing now. But you can only see injustice happening so much. And the more that we went to the roundups in particular, and the more that we saw the Bureau of Land Management lying to people, and these publicists that they bring to the roundups to parrot this misinformation and disinformation to the public, this blanket statement that horses are overpopulated, they're starving, we're rounding them up for their own good, that's false. And so the more that I heard that script being told to the media, eventually there was one day at the roundup of the Aniki where I was so angry, and you try to also, if not bury that's not the right word, but I wanted to be a journalist to make sure I was doing my job for the horses. But I asked everybody on the mountain that day with a camera to turn around and to start filming a conversation I had with Gus War and Lisa Reed, which is in the film. And I ended up interviewing law enforcement as well, which was interesting. But after that turn, we started to realize it was that, and then the decision to go undercover into the slaughter pipeline. That's when the film took a turn and kind of guided us to where it wanted to be. And so as I was editing the film, I was initially writing the voiceover for someone else, but the more I started leaning into some of the personal stuff, I realized that we had to allow it to become personal. So I edited the film and wrote the narration as I was cutting. So it was a really unique process. It was a hard process as well, just emotionally, with all of the roundups.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I know, because it's like there's a rich history, I think, of documentarians who kind of insert themselves, like Nick Broomfield is just one example, who insert themselves into the film, and kind of you see the film very distinctly from their POV. And I love the inclusion that you had of yourself, very much of, but there was a terrific, I mean, there was there was a great sense of melancholy and authenticity in how you approach this subject matter, and your passion for what you were depicting came forth in such a beautiful way. So I was very moved by that, especially towards, the end, with a very harrowing roundup, and your absolute outrage when you saw that little girl come out of the helicopter. Did you ever find out who she was or anything? I mean, not spoiler. I know that may be a spoiler alert, but would love to find out who she was. Like, who would take a little kid too on such a dangerous helicopter ride like that? So I was just curious about that too.
It was absurd when we saw that happening. I mean, and I love working with kids. I work with a lot of kids. And when she stepped out of the helicopter, she was maybe 8 years old. And that was the same roundup, the roundup of the Anarchy, where we kept being told that our crew could not get a clear shot at the trap site because it was for safety. We were kept miles away on top of a mountain as they proceeded to hide the trap site behind another mountain, so we couldn't see anything at all. And that's what they always do. The Bureau of Land Management always tries to hide the roundup because they don't want you seeing the injuries. They don't want media capturing that. And so finally, after about an hour and a half of this discussion with Gus War and citing our constitutional rights, they finally allowed us to go and hike out to a point where we could see part of the trap site. And as soon as we got there, they were hiding the corrals with trucks and horses and other objects, so we couldn't see, but we could see enough to watch the little girl get out. And then she proceeded to ride around on a water truck near the horses. And I ended up going to law enforcement because there were a lot of people there. And I told one individual that it would just how truly dangerous that would be, that a kick to the face would be potentially fatal for that little girl. And she was escorted offsite immediately. So that speaks to the fact that they should not have been doing that, and also speaks to what the agency is doing to journalists and media. And they're not even getting their hands slapped.
That's amazing. No, I was dumbfounded at that moment. That was just so shocking. There are obviously, so many harrowing scenes in the film, and, the auction house particularly stands out for me. Can you talk us through that sequence and what it was like to film that?
The auction sequence, I mean, there were a lot of tough parts to the journey, but that's the only time that I felt nervous about safety.
Right.
But it was an important part of the story, because the backstory on that is the Bureau of Land Management likes to talk about adopting wild horses to the public. And I think that's also a smokescreen for what they're, the way that they're framing all of this to the media, but because so few horses are actually adopted. But their adoption incentive program, you can go to a wild horse holding facility and you can adopt a wild horse for $25. And the government will then pay you $1,000 to take the horse, $500 upon the adoption, $500 after a year, and then you get your title. Once you get the title, you can do pretty much anything you want with that horse with no accountability. So the New York Times did a great expose on this a couple of years ago, but there have been duplicitous people that have adopted these horses and then they've thrown them out to pasture for a year. Some of them don't even wait, but they flip them into the slaughter pipeline. So they'll get paid another $1,000 or $1,500 to flip federally protected wild horses into auctions where they get illegally shipped to Mexico or Canada for slaughter. And so we really wanted to go down there and expose that. And I had this little DJI camera with a little gimbal head that I kept wedging into my purse. And the problem was the gimbal head kept getting stuck. And I hid it behind a handkerchief and was trying to use it. And it started beeping in the auction. And so that's a close-knit community. And it was my little brother, younger brother, he's a producer now. And my father came for safety for that. So it was just the three of us. And my brother wore a button cam, which we sewed into his shirt. And I ended up not being able to use my camera. So most of the footage we have is from his button cam. And so I wished that I had millions of dollars to save all the horses that we saw, because it was so clear when certain bidders were bidding on them to create a load and take them to Mexico.
That's
So
so heartbreaking. Yeah. Oh, that's awful. I know the donkeys too and the zebras, that was just shocking to see. That was surreal and so horrific as well. So that was um I wanted to ask you a little bit about just some of the technology behind your filming, because I was so impressed with the fluidity and the movement of the camera, and how you just captured these absolutely stunningly beautiful, um, melodious, images. And how did you partner with your DP, and how did you arrange for this beautiful choreography of the camera that you were able to pull off?
thank you. Well, I'm fortunate, very fortunate, that I got to work with a cinematographer named Kai Kraus, who has been my collaborator for a number of years.
Mm.
And so we started talking about this in late 2017 or early 2018. And we very much wanted to film the documentary anamorphic and with texture and give it a filmic look. And
Right.
but then we're also faced with, sometimes the horses are very far away, or the roundups you're on, on the mountain, and they keep the trap site so far. We had to use this massive wildlife Canon zoom, a spherical lens that doesn't have the beautiful texture of the Kawas. And so a lot of it was, Kai has such an incredible eye. And he reached out to me blindly about, I want to say 6 years ago. He saw some of my work and sent an email, and I looked at his website, and he sent such a lovely message. When people send lovely messages, you have to respond. And his work was just so beautiful and so in line with how I see the world. And so we started working together. And so his sensibility just is very lyrical. It's very emotional. It's very poetic. The way he frames a horse, it's not like you're framing a medium of a horse. It's like you're framing, I almost hesitate to say framing a human, because that feels like we're putting that above, but less people, I suppose, film wild horses. So the way that we were able to capture all of that was a great deal due to his sensibility and mine. And then just some really beautiful luck on certain days where with the Anarchy, they got to know us too. And so some days we'd come over the mountain and they'd remember us, and they wouldn't run, and we'd get to, we never touched them, but we got to have these incredible moments with these families. And Kai and I would get really bold. There was one day, and some of the shots are in the film, where the one stallion Stargazer is battling. He's battling stallions. They were 10 feet away, and we didn't intend to actually get that close. But and that was a day where he was wearing a rig, and we had our beautiful anamorphic lenses on the camera, and we were actually able to get those insane shots of those horses going. It was incredible.
Right.
And so it was a ballet of sorts, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why. Yeah, I totally agree. It was a ballet because there was such fluidity and like really beautiful improvisational movement that I felt in the camera work. So that was, it was just really lovely to witness that, I thought. Just going into a little bit of about bringing up Stargazer. You so lovingly allow us glimpses into these horses and their respective characters, and they become so distinctive throughout the course of the film. And how did you realize the characteristics that these horses possessed?
That really evolved by spending time with them and getting to know their individual personalities. Again, just like humans, some of them were shyer, some of them were quirky, others were powerful. Stargazer, it was almost like Stargazer knew he was beautiful, but he wasn't arrogant. But there was something, he had a presence. And then there were other horses, like the one that was called Norman, who's this white horse. He's called a Cremello, with these piercing blue eyes. And he's also really beautiful, but he had such a funny, quirky, kind of wonky personality. And he would just kind of bounce around and, didn't have a family. He was a young stallion.
Mhm.
And so it was just really neat to see how distinct each individual was. And I think that that's also what people resonate in the film when they get to know those characters, and it makes for it to be even harder to see when they get rounded up. And that's what we wanted to try to achieve too. And just again, in a number of serendipitous ways, that found us as well. And it kind of felt like we were on the right path when that would happen.
Right. No, I totally saw that. I mean, there was such a humanistic element to that. I mean, I know sometimes we're told not to anthropomorphize. I always mangle that word. Various animals, but at the same time too, I think that you were able to capture so beautifully their personalities and make us deeply care about this one herd, too. So that was just really a lovely thing to witness, I thought.
Thank you.
What are your hopes for the film in terms of advocacy and change? I know that when we spoke a little bit about this yesterday, you talked about some of the, some of the sort of, the current, sort of, I guess, outreach that you were doing to laws in Congress. I love the fact that Richard Nixon, who I'm not really a fan of, but he was the first one to create this legislation that protected them. Mm-hmm. And that did come from letter writing from children. And I think you mentioned too that you were hoping to do that again this time around and to encourage that. So I would love to know what your plans are, what your hopes for this film are, and what you would love to see changed.
Absolutely. We're hoping the film becomes a tool for people to use to make change. And what's been pretty special, we've been to Washington, D.C. twice now. In June, we screened before members of Congress, staff, press. We even brought a real wild horse to the theater in the middle of Washington, D.C. and we projected our thank you. The night before the screening, we actually projected our footage against the Department of the Interior for about an hour that evening of the roundups, asking them to stop. And so we're trying all sorts of creative ways to get people to look, because there's a lot going on in the world, but this is our little corner of it. And I feel like if everyone picked one, planet would be a better place. But with Wild Beauty, there's a very important bill called the Wild Horse and Burro Protection Act, which is HR 3656. And if it passes, it would eliminate the use of helicopters in the wild horse roundups, which we feel like is a first major step and precedent for something in this issue to change. Nothing has changed for so long. The Bureau of Land Management has gotten away with this for so long. And so we're hoping that passes. That doesn't solve everything. Ultimately, this is a much bigger fight to start preserving the ecological balance of our public lands and our country. And that spirals into the eradication of wolves and mountain lions and other predators. But so there's a larger fight to have to preserve wild horses. But that helicopter bill, I think, animal cruelty, if you're an empathetic person, that's something you can stand behind. So we feel like, despite being on one side of the aisle or the other, we're trying to get support for that bill. So we're asking people who are moved by the film and who care about this and can spend 5 minutes of their day, because every voice adds up, to please contact their members of Congress or to write a letter and ask them to support that bill. And then our tagline has been, I stand with wild horses. And that's what we've done with kids. We've mirrored a letter writing campaign that inspired Nixon in the 70s. I've been going around to schools talking to children, and we've launched a national letter writing campaign for kids to write to their lawmakers on behalf of wild horses. So we're hoping that people who see the film are inspired and outraged and spend a few minutes to try to help us make a difference, because we can make change, but it's going to take an army of people to do that. So we're asking people also to spread the word and to share the trailer with I Stand with Wild Horses.
That's wonderful, Ashley. Well, I too was inspired and outraged while I watched your film, and very, very moved. So it's a pleasure talking to you about it, Ashley. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you. And anything you would like to conclude with? Anything that I might not have asked you, but you would love to voice at this point at all?
Perhaps I would just say, also, I get the question of who's paying for the roundups and all this animal cruelty. And we are. This is funded by our tax dollars. The roundups, the cruelty, the eradication of horses, the stripping of these family bonds, we're paying for this. And most Americans disagree with that when they know that that's happening. And why is it happening? It's to give deference to a couple of special interest groups, predominantly tax subsidized livestock grazing. So we can't let cattle and sheep and people making millions of dollars off of destroying the ecological balance of the public lands to win and to lose wild horses. We can't lose wild horses. And that's not just for us, that's for future generations. So I want people to know that. And if anyone wants to continue to follow our journey, this is not going to stop with this documentary. They can follow that through our nonprofit, which is the Wild Beauty Foundation.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Such a pleasure to speak with you. And I loved your film. So I hope it's really gets widely seen. It's such a piece of art and such an important story. So thank you for sharing it with us.
Amazing. Thank you, Alix, for the time.
Thank you.